A 54-year-old inactive power line re-energized itself and caused one of California's most fatal fires. Turns out Southern California Edison assumed the inactive would stay inactive, which is optimistic but historically inaccurate for anyone running a cemetery. Before you click away thinking this is another conspiracy video, stay with me, because the strangest part isn't what people are claiming happened. It's what definitely happened that makes no sense. The region was experiencing its driest 9-month period on record. Vegetation moisture levels had dropped so low that the chaparral was basically kindling. And on January 7, 2025, at 10:30 a.m., the Palisades fire ignited in Pacific Palisades. It started at the exact location where another fire, the Lockman Fire, had been declared fully extinguished just 6 days earlier. The Los Angeles Fire Department said the Lockman Fire was out, completely extinguished, but internal firefighter texts tell a different story. Quote, "The ground was still smoldering and rocks remained hot to touch." So which is it? Because in firefighting, those aren't synonyms. They're opposites. It's like declaring your oven off while the turkey's still cooking. Technically, you turned the knob, but physics disagrees. Firefighters were ordered to leave despite knowing it was still hot. So let me get this straight. The National Weather Service issues a warning so severe they use the words life-threatening and particularly dangerous situation, which in meteorology speak, ASH is basically screaming, "Get ready!" And the LAFD's response was to send everyone home? That's not a staffing decision. That's a punchline. On the morning of January 7th, 1,000 firefighters were sent home. 0 engines were pre-deployed, despite extreme warnings. I've seen better disaster preparedness at a kid's birthday party. Now notice what happens next. 8 hours and 48 minutes later, a second fire starts. Not near the Palisades, not downwind, 21 miles away in Eaton Canyon. Southern California Edison would later admit the ignition source, a zombie transmission line. This line had been decommissioned since 1971. That's 54 years sitting inactive in the grid. Except it wasn't inactive. The line re-energized via magnetic induction from an adjacent active line. Or a power line that's been turned off for half a century suddenly comes back to life because another line nearby was still hot. It's like discovering your unplugged toaster is still making toast because it's standing next to the microwave. Except instead of burnt bread, you get a firestorm. Honestly, if Southern California Edison ran a cemetery, the deceased would start filing tax returns. This happened during wind gusts that peaked at 100 miles per hour, nearly double the grid's design rating of 56 miles per hour. The grid was built for a Category 1 hurricane. It got a Category 2. Within 18 minutes, helicopters had to abort water drops due to severe turbulence. The fire expanded to 1,000 acres within 6 hours. Firefighters trained for fires that spread at maybe 1 acre per minute in extreme conditions. This was 3 football fields per minute, 70 times faster. Which raises an uncomfortable question. Were they even fighting the same kind of fire? And then something happened that would become the defining image of these fires. Homes burned completely down to white ash. But the trees next to them? Still green? Still standing? How does a fire hot enough to vaporize a house somehow not harm a tree 3 feet away? That's not a wildfire. That's selective combustion. The fire had better aim than most professional archers. And if you think that's strange, wait until you see what happened to the water. January 8, 2025. 3 a.m. Fire hydrants in Pacific Palisades go dry. 3 storage tanks, each holding 1 million gallons, are fully depleted. And then investigators discovered the Santa Ynez Reservoir, but which holds 117 million gallons and sits uphill from Pacific Palisades, is completely empty. LADWP officials explained that demand was 4 times normal levels and that pumps couldn't fight gravity. The Santa Ynez Reservoir holds 117 million gallons. It sits uphill, meaning gravity works for you, not against you. The 3 storage tanks held 3 million gallons combined. That's 120 million gallons that simply vanished. 4 times normal demand doesn't explain zero water. It explains empty tanks. But empty reservoirs? That's a different problem. And according to LADWP's own timeline, those repairs were supposed to be finished by April 2024. It's January 2025. 9 months. People have gestated and birthed entire humans in the time it took to not fix this reservoir. South, why did nobody check if it was full before the biggest fire warning in years? Martin Adams, former LADWP chief engineer, stated the system was designed for urban structure fires, not mass conflagrations. We built this to handle house fires, not neighborhoods burning simultaneously. It's like designing a fire extinguisher for birthday candles, and then acting surprised when it doesn't work on a burning building. Maybe the reservoir being empty was just bad luck. But how many coincidences do we accept before bad luck becomes bad planning? To incinerate a wood frame house takes 600 to 800 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt aluminum. In photo after photo, you can see cars reduced to molten metal puddles. Aluminum engines melted into the pavement like Salvador Dali clocks. But the tree next to the car? Naim still has leaves. The tree is out here surviving like it's in a different climate zone, like it's on vacation while the neighborhood burns. Living trees are 60 to 100% water. To ignite one, you need to boil off all that moisture first, more energy than burning a dry house. So, how does the house vaporize while the tree 3 feet away stays green? Wildfire experts call this fuel selectivity, but it doesn't happen in normal wildfire conditions. And yet it happened over and over. Evacuation orders were issued at different times for different neighborhoods. East Altadena, 8% black, received warnings early. West Altadena, 30% black, received them hours later. 18 of 19 Eaton fire fatalities occurred in West Altadena. So was this negligence, systemic bias, chaos? All three. And the fact that we have to ask which flavor of failure claimed these lives should tell you everything. Public records revealed that an order to cut power in the Palisades was logged at 1:49 p.m. on January 7th. Except the technician who actually pulled the switch says he did it at 6:18 p.m. That's a 4.5-hour gap. The log was retroactively altered 22 days later, so either the log is wrong or the technician is lying. But why would a utility company backdate a log unless the timestamp mattered legally? Nothing says totally normal utility operation, quite like editing timestamps 3 weeks after the fact. The kind that just happens to change the legal liability window by 4.5 hours. It's like updating your report card after graduation. Sure, technically you can do it, but it does raise some questions. Air quality sensors registered PM 2.5 levels at 569 micrograms per cubic meter. The WHO considers anything above 35 hazardous. But here's what wasn't being measured: lead, arsenic, beryllium, heavy metals from burning infrastructure, metals that settle into the soil, into the water, into lungs. And while people were evacuating, while homes were burning, someone was paying attention to something else. The internet. You've seen the videos. Blue cars untouched in parking lots full of ash. Blue umbrellas standing pristine next to incinerated homes. Blue roofs that somehow survived while everything around them burned. And people are asking, is this proof of directed energy weapons? If you want to see more cases where the official story collapses, hit subscribe. Boy, viral images show you what's unusual. Nobody posted a photo of a red car that burned. But a blue car that survived? That's shareable. So you see 50 photos of blue things that didn't burn, and your brain says, this is a pattern. But you're not seeing the 1,000 blue things that did burn. Blue surfaces can absorb infrared laser energy rather than reflect it. For a DEW to selectively not burn blue things, it would have to be tuned to avoid those wavelengths, which means someone programmed a space laser with a no blue things setting. That's not warfare. That's interior decorating. It's like if the Death Star had a Pinterest board, but some blue items did burn. So if it's a laser, it's incredibly inconsistent. And if it's not a laser, why are any blue things surviving where aluminum is melting? If you understand the actual physics of lasers, the blue roof theory falls apart. But it falls apart in a way that makes something else make even less sense. Look, I'm not here to tell you DEWs caused these fires, but I'm also not here to tell you that every weird thing has a neat explanation. Because it doesn't. While everyone argued about paint colors and laser beams, something actually important was happening. A DJI Mini 3 drone, a $500 consumer quadcopter, collided with a Canadair CL-415 Super Scooper wing during a water drop. That one civilian drone grounded a multi-million-dollar firefighting aircraft during the most critical containment window. So while conspiracy theorists were scanning the sky for government lasers, an actual aircraft was taken down by something you can buy on Amazon. Dude, the irony is almost poetic. Forget space weapons. Apparently, all you need to defeat modern aerial firefighting is a credit card and 2-day shipping. NEXRAD radar anomalies. Social media exploded with circular patterns on weather radar. Patterns conspiracy theorists claimed were atmospheric manipulation. Meteorologists explained these as ground clutter and smoke interference. But ground clutter doesn't form perfect circles, and smoke doesn't create geometric patterns. So either these meteorologists have never seen smoke before, or they're explaining away something they don't understand by using terms they think you won't question. When experts start using jargon as a shield instead of an explanation, that's when you know they're uncomfortable. Posts mentioning DEW increased 5 times. Saw videos circulated showing green laser beams, supposedly targeting homes. These were later proven to be LIDAR scans, or recycled 2018 SpaceX footage. So the smoking evidence of space lasers was literally footage of SpaceX, which means people saw Elon Musk's rockets and concluded the government was attacking California, which, given Elon's track record, is not the most far-fetched thing he's been accused of. High-powered microwave weapons exist. The military has them. They disable electronics by generating electromagnetic pulses that fry circuits. but they don't generate enough thermal energy to incinerate houses. To burn a house with microwaves, you'd need to turn it into a giant oven. The power requirements are staggering. Megawatts sustained over minutes. That power signature would show up on infrared, electrical grids, every monitoring station within 50 miles. It's the energetic equivalent of playing a tuba in a library. Could an HPM weapon disable water pumps? Maybe. Could it melt a car engine? Absolutely not. Another theory, the fires were deliberately set to clear land for Smart LA 2028, a planned smart city initiative. You know what's a terrible way to acquire land? Burning down private property and then still having it be private property. Because that's what happened. The parcels didn't become government-owned. So unless this is the world's worst eminent domain strategy, this theory makes zero sense. It's like robbing a bank by setting fire to the money. Technically, you committed a crime, but you didn't actually get what you wanted. So no space lasers, no microwave weapons, no smart city land grab. But while everyone looked up, something worse was happening on the ground. The CDC measured atmospheric lead levels. They spiked 110-fold. This was pre-1978 infrastructure burning. Lead paint, pipes, solder. Stuff sitting in walls for 50 years, becoming airborne when houses vaporized. Lead doesn't break down, ever. It settles into soil, water tables, and children's lungs. The fires are out, but the lead is permanent. And nobody's talking about it because space lasers get more clicks than heavy metal poisoning. 31 fatalities. That's the official number. But USC researchers ran the models. Hospital admissions, smoke inhalation cases, cardiac events. Their estimate? 440 excess fatalities, 14 times the official count. That's not a margin of error. That's a different disaster. Why the disparity? Loss to fire is easy to count. Loss to smoke inhalation 3 days later isn't. Succumb to a heart attack triggered by evacuation stress? Not in the official tally. And while people were perishing, the cleanup had already begun, but not the kind you'd expect. Within 48 hours, the cleanup began. But this wasn't cleanup. This was removed. Normally, investigators preserve the scene. They test soil. They document debris. That didn't happen here. Governor Newsom suspended the California Environmental Quality Act and Coastal Act requirements for burn zones to expedite recovery. But let's be clear, removing contaminated soil before testing it for contamination. Bypassing the Coastal Act, which exists to prevent toxins from washing into the ocean. Deciding speed is more important than safety. Why the rush? Remove 6 inches of topsoil from thousands of properties. Before testing, before documenting, just gone. When dealing with contamination, you sample the soil, test for heavy metals, carcinogens, and volatile organic compounds. You document what's there before you move it, because once you move it, the evidence is gone. The Army Corps and FEMA removed topsoil without testing in some areas. Their reasoning? Speed. Get people back faster. Which is great, except you're sending them back to land that might glow in the dark. Independent testing shows 49% of sites still have high lead levels. 0.5% qualify as hazardous waste sites. People are being cleared to rebuild on land that's legally too contaminated to touch. So whose decision was it to skip testing? And more importantly, whose decision was it to hide that fact until independent researchers found it? If you're thinking, this is just bureaucracy, ask yourself, when has removing evidence ever been part of finding the truth? While the state scraped away evidence, one agency was suing. On February 14th, the Department of Justice filed a lawsuit against Southern California Edison for cost recovery. They're explicitly blaming SCE's equipment for the Eaton fire. 39 days after the fire. The investigation moved incredibly fast, or the evidence was incredibly obvious. When the federal government moves that quickly, it usually means they found something they can't ignore. The DOJ is suing. SCE is offering settlements. Victims are caught in the middle. Take a check now, or wait years for a trial. Most can't afford to wait. Southern California Edison launched a wildfire recovery compensation program. Sounds helpful until you read the fine print. Expedited payment, but only if you waive your right to sue. Forever. This is textbook liability management. You offer money when people are desperate. Home's gone, insurance denying claims, and make it conditional. Sign here, get paid now. But you can never sue us. Because once you settle, discovery ends. And discovery is where companies get caught lying. Settlements aren't admissions of guilt. They're insurance policies against the truth coming out in court. It's the legal equivalent of, I'll give you $20 to never speak of this again. Except the $20 is your entire home's value, and the this is potentially criminal negligence. Logically, intelligence tracked 76,000 posts about the fires. 5% of accounts generated 40% of all misleading content. Those accounts? Many are linked to state actors. Russian state media, Iranian outlets, seeding narratives hours before they spread domestically. This is textbook information warfare. Flood the zone with competing narratives, DEWs, arson, government conspiracies, so nobody can figure out what actually happened. And it worked. While people argued about lasers and blue roofs, the real story, zombie power lines, empty reservoirs, delayed evacuations, got buried. Nearly half of all black households in Altadena are gone. Altadena was one of the few historically black neighborhoods in Los Angeles County, a safe haven during redlining, a place where black families could buy property when shut out everywhere else. And now, it's ash. Who rebuilds? If you can't afford to wait for insurance, can't afford to sue SCE, can't afford to rebuild while land values spike, you don't come back. And Altadena stops being a black neighborhood, which means the fires didn't just destroy property. They completed what redlining started. Fire Chief Kristen Crowley was fired 34 days after the fires. Her offense? Telling the truth. She said there were 100 fire apparatus out of service. She said budget cuts crippled response capacity. The city called her a liar and fired her. The city council insists the budget increased. Technically true. Total spending went up, but operational capacity went down. The money went somewhere else. Raises, pensions, administrative overhead. Saw everything except the trucks and hydrants that might have stopped this. They gave firefighters raises and didn't buy equipment. That's not an increase. That's a shell game. It's like your boss saying, "Good news, you got a 3% raise. Bad news, we sold your desk. And your computer. And the building. But hey, your paycheck is slightly bigger, so technically we invested in you." So we have contaminated soil removed without testing. A utility company buying silence with settlements. A fired fire chief and a city council pointing fingers. And through it all, if this was just a wildfire, why does everyone seem so desperate to bury the evidence? So what really happened? By now you've noticed, every explanation breaks somewhere. And here's the uncomfortable part. Maybe they all break because they're all partly true. Maybe that's why nothing makes sense. Let's say it was just a wildfire. Wind speeds hit 100 miles per hour. Vegetation was critically dry. Santa Ana conditions. California has precedent. Except wildfires don't re-energize 54-year-old decommissioned power lines. That's not wind. That's magnetic induction. That's physics that requires infrastructure failure. So maybe it wasn't just a wildfire. Maybe it was an infrastructure collapse that looked like a wildfire. You know, the kind of infrastructure collapse that's been sitting there waiting to happen since the Nixon administration. Really puts aging infrastructure into perspective when the infrastructure is old enough to have voted for Reagan. But then why the blue roofs? Why selective combustion? That's where the DEW theorists jump in. Directed energy weapons. Military tech exists. HELIOS, Except if you're using a space laser, why do you need a zombie power line? And why didn't any satellite show heat signatures? Why didn't electrical grids register megawatts of power draw? DEWs require line of sight. They generate massive thermal signatures. They need power sources you can't hide. None of that appeared. So if it's not a laser, what explains the trees surviving next to vaporized houses? Fuel cell activity, the experts say. Which brings us to negligence. Zombie power line, confirmed. Empty reservoir 9 months overdue, confirmed. Budget cuts, delayed evacuations, bypassed thermal imaging, all confirmed. This is the closest to what actually happened. Except negligence doesn't explain coordination. It doesn't explain 2 fires starting 21 miles apart within 8 hours. It doesn't explain why invasive grasses that dry out weeks earlier than native plants were suddenly the primary fuel. Negligence is incompetence. But this level of simultaneous failure, that starts looking like something else. Which is why the arson theory won't disappear. Jonathan Rinderknecht charged with starting Lockman. Power logs altered retroactively. Evidence removed before testing. So an arsonist starts Lockman, it smolders for 6 days, then reignites. But Eaton is 21 miles away. So either there's a second arsonist nobody found, which, given how thoroughly they investigated the first one, is entirely possible, or Eaton was the zombie power line, which is confirmed. 2 different causes, same outcome. Unless the arson was covered for infrastructure failure. Unless the infrastructure failure was blamed on arson. So, unless someone knew both were about to happen and did nothing. Or unless... See the problem? Every theory explains part of it. None of them explain all of it. The official story has holes. The conspiracies have bigger holes. The middle ground still doesn't add up. So either we're missing something or we're looking at something we don't have words for yet. So here's where I need your help. Drop a comment right now. Which theory do you think is closest? Just a wildfire? Infrastructure collapse? Coordinated negligence? Something else entirely? Because honestly, I'm not sure anymore. And maybe that's the point. But here's what keeps me up at night. Not the theories, the math. The fires represented a 5 sigma weather event. 5 standard deviations from the mean. In statistics, that's 1 in 3.5 million. Extreme wind, extreme drought, anthropogenic ignition, all simultaneously in 2 zones. 5 sigma events don't just happen. Scientists see 5 sigma and go, wait, check the data again. Because if it's real, the baseline shifts. And we missed it. Southern California Edison admitted the Eaton fire started because a power line decommissioned in 1971, 54 years ago, re-energized via magnetic induction. There's no law requiring utilities to remove old lines. They just leave them hanging, dormant. Except when they're not, when they become ghosts in the grid. And how many more are out there? Nobody knows. Nobody's required to track them. Which means this can happen again. Will happen again. It's not a question of if, it's when. Southern California Edison is basically running an electrical zombie apocalypse, and nobody's keeping track of how many zombies there are. What could possibly go wrong? While everyone looked at power lines and reservoirs, ecologists looked at the fuel. Not native chaparral, Bromus tectorum, an invasive grass that dries out 4 to 6 weeks earlier. This grass doesn't belong in Southern California, but it's there. Climate change, land management failures. It acts like a wick connecting fires across gaps that should stop them. The botanical equivalent of leaving gasoline-soaked rags between your houses. The fires were moving through a landscape preloaded with accelerants. We did that. Not on purpose, but we did it. Forensic analysts believe Palisades was a holdover. Embers from Lockman stayed hot underground for 6 days, then reignited when winds hit. But LAFD protocols require thermal imaging scans after every fire to detect hotspots. Those scans didn't happen, or were ignored. Either way, damning. Climate models predict Santa Ana winds are shifting. Historically, they peaked in October. Now they're coming in December and January, after months of dryness. The fire season is decoupling from the rainy season. We used to predict fire weather. Now the models say we're entering uncharted territory, which is a polite way of saying, the rules changed, and we don't know what the new rules are yet. 31 people perished in the fires. Headlines say 31. But USC researchers estimated 440 excess fatalities. People who perished from smoke inhalation days later, cardiac events during evacuation, stress complications. Sal 31 perished in the fires. 440 perished because of the fires. Only one number makes the news. Those people aren't in the memorial, not in the statistics. They're ghosts. The disparity tells you everything about how we count disaster fatalities. Here's what makes all the conspiracy theories fall apart. We know what started these fires. A 1971 copper wire and a cigarette lighter wielded by a man named Jonathan Rinderknecht. Not a space laser, not a microwave weapon, not a government plot. A half-century-old piece of infrastructure and a guy with a bic. And that's more terrifying than any conspiracy, because conspiracies require coordination, competence, intent. This is entropy. This is what happens when systems fail and nobody notices until it's too late. You can't fight entropy with a lawsuit. You can't vote it out. It just is. And it's winning. Entropy doesn't need a conspiracy. It just needs neglect. And we've been very, very generous with the neglect. The Eaton fire is now the 5th most fatal wildfire in California history. Damage exceeds $27.5 billion. Nearly half of Altadena's black households are gone. And we still don't have answers. Why was the reservoir empty 9 months after repairs? Why were 1,000 firefighters sent home before a red flag warning? Why did West Altadena get evacuation orders hours after East Altadena? Why was contaminated soil removed before testing? Why did SCE offer settlements contingent on waiving the right to sue? Why was the fire chief fired for telling the truth? What happened on January 2025 wasn't just a wildfire. It was a warning. And we're not ready for what comes next. If this disturbed you, share it. And hit like if you'll never look at power lines the same way again. The most dangerous systems are the ones we stop paying attention to. And California stopped paying attention sometime around 1971.